So I'm on the internet for hours looking for a cabin. $300, $400, $500 a night. I'm thinking, are these people crazy? Not buy it, right? And then I come across one little advertisement for a cabin for $75 a night. Now, you know what they say if it sounds too good to be true? So I gave the owner, Mrs. Clark, a call. Well, she immediately launches into this story about some kind of a ghost named Clara Beth that purportedly haunts the place. I said, oh, wow. Mrs. Clark, I don't know, a ghost? I mean, under the circumstances, would you take $50 a night for the cabin? Well, I couldn't believe it, but she agreed. Although she did tack on a $10 a night, a $10 total key deposit. Of course, I was going to get that back when I returned the key. I was still a little perturbed, but I went along with it anyways. So the following weekend, my husband and I are winding our way up through the mountains to the cabin. Now, about the time that we arrived, a big storm started building up. There was thunder and lightning and blowing, howling winds, which you probably expected because I already told you this was a ghost story. We no sooner got our luggage inside than it started to pour rain, pelting rain. And then the power went out. Now, I don't know about you guys, but at my age, my husband and I can't think of very much to do when the lights go out and it's late at night. So we climbed up into the loft and we went to sleep. Well, I should say he went to sleep. He goes to sleep as soon as his head hits the pillow. I, on the other hand, am on high alert. And that's when I hear her. Ooh. I thought, Claire Beth, is that you? I said, boo-boo, 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 are you awake? I shook him a few more times, are you awake? He rolls over and he goes, oh, pookers. What now? I said, hey, do you hear her? Ooh, it's Clara Beth. He said, that is not a ghost, honey. He said, that is just the wind howling through the chinks in this old cabin. Now he said, you remember what happened last year when you were convinced the neighbors were serial killers? I said, I can't do that again. He said, lay yourself down and go to sleep. And with that, he rolls over. I think he's snoring again. I sat there a minute. I thought, okay, he's not going to be any help, my knight in shining armor, my protector. So I grabbed a candle that was sitting on the nightstand, and I went down the stairs. And I set that candle right in the middle of a big farm table that Mrs. Clark had in the kitchen. It was a really nice table, too. And then I noticed a broom, a straw broom over in the corner, and I grabbed that broom. Now, I don't want you to get the wrong impression. I am not a violent person, but I was not about to take any sheet off that ghost. Well, it's a good thing I got that broom, because the second I picked it up, I felt this chill blow across the back of my neck. And I turned and I swung that broom. Now, here's the really exciting part that most of you are not going to believe. I almost did not graduate high school. Yeah, it was lack of a PE credit. You know, physical education. Probably comes as a surprise to you, right? I had never once, ever in my entire life hit anything with a bat. Never. And yet there I was that day like Mickey Mantle. When I swung that broom, I hit that candle sitting on top of that table. But I mean, you know, at least I had something, right? And I sent it flying clear across that room, straight into the most adorable little diaphanous drapes that Mrs. Clark had hung in the window. And I'm going to tell you that those things went up in flames like a dry Christmas tree come the end of January. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm standing there and I'm trying to remember what it says you're supposed to do on the fire safety website that Doug makes me read twice a year. Ever since that little incident at the neighbor's housewarming party. Seems like overkill to me, but whatever. I'm trying to remember that, and in the meantime, those drapes are melting down onto that sofa. Now, really, in a way, part of this is Mrs. Clark's fault because she should have been a lot more careful. Doug makes sure that all of our furniture is flame retardant because that sofa is going up in flames. And I'm standing there looking at it, and I'm thinking I should do something, and I took that broom and I started swatting at it. And that might not have been my best idea given the broom was straw. The next thing I know, it's like a flaming torch in my hand. And I don't want to get burned, so I winged that thing across the room. It fell. I tell you, Mrs. Clark is thoughtful. Maybe not the brightest woman, but she was very thoughtful. She had set by the fireplace this adorable little basket, and it had wadded up balls of orange paper and yellow paper and red and blue tissue paper, you know, like fall colors. She put it there probably to start a fire with. I mean, she probably meant in the fireplace, but now that broom has landed there and the whole room is in flames, the carpet's starting to burn. And I'm wondering whether, is this thing out of control? Should I be doing something else? Well, about that time, down comes my husband, Doug. Now he's coming down the stairs and he's coughing, tripping, trying to pull on his trousers, and he just grabs my arm, rather abruptly, I might add, and he drags me out of that cabin. And we leaned against the hood of that car in what I can only describe as agonizing silence. And we watched that little cabin burn to the ground. When it was nothing left but smoldering ash, he turns to me and he says, "Well, we better go into town and tell Mrs. Clark what you did to her cabin." Like, me? What I did to her cabin? Really? You mean what Clara Beth did to her cabin? He says, "Pokers." He just turns and he starts to walk away, and I said, "Whoa, whoa, 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 wait 1 minute." He said, "What?" I said, "Do you have the keys to the cabin in your trouser pockets?" And he goes, "Oh, honey, don't tell me you are..." I said, "I have to give the keys back to get my $10 deposit." I mean, it is not like we have money to burn now, do we? Well, I can only tell you that when we went into town, Mrs. Clark was not very happy to hear what Clara Beth did to her cabin. Which you can only imagine, I wasn't very happy either. I mean, I was expecting a fiery, romantic weekend, but my dreams had gone up in smoke. Thank you.
I want to tell you a story I heard a couple of summers back when my family was at the beach. We were on Edisto Island. Do y'all know where that is? Yeah, some of you, South Carolina do. If you don't, it's just off the coast of South Carolina. It's maybe an hour from Charleston. The story is about a girl who visited Edisto in the summer of 1850 and never came home. Julia was 14 that summer. Spun gold hair and lips perpetually tilted up into a smile. People would always say, "Oh, Julia is the sweetest thing." And they would follow that with, "Bless her heart." Now, some of you are laughing, and that's how I know you're Southerners, because you know that phrase can have a multitude of meanings in this part of the world. But in this case, it was sincerely meant. You see, Julia was a sickly child, born with weak lungs that never got any better. So in the summer of 1850, her doctor recommended that she go to the seaside, take in that ocean air, open up her lungs. Julia's parents had kin down on Edisto, the Laguerres. They made a fortune in cotton, had a sizable home, more than enough room for a summer guest. So they sent her there. But that was a fatal decision. When Julia was down on the beach, she did breathe deeply and well. But inland on the island, where the Laguerres had their home, the air was heavy, muggy, filled with the buzz of insects. It was still. It was deadly. Within days of her arrival, Julia grew pale and listless. The Laguerres thought it was just the heat. They said, oh, she needs to acclimate. Don't we always say that when people move to the south? But when the fever set in, and Julia's throat closed up, they realized their mistake. You see, diphtheria swept through the lowlands that summer, making its home in Edisto's dank, stagnant marsh water. In 1850, there was no cure. The disease progresses so rapidly that you cannot breathe. Julia's parents were notified of her death, but burial could not wait for their arrival. You see, with the temperatures in the high 90s every day and mortuary science in its infancy, you had to get a body into the ground or into a crypt as quickly as possible. So her funeral was arranged and held that same day at the Edisto Presbyterian Church. The church was fairly new, just built in the 1830s by a Charleston architect, but the graveyard that surrounded the church on three sides dated back centuries. The graves were ringed in ancient oak trees, draped in Spanish moss that hovered over the ground. Strange things happened in that graveyard. Once, a white stallion leaped so high in the air, it got caught in the fork of one of those oak trees. And its skeleton remained there for years, picked clean by the birds. That graveyard was, and is, said to be haunted. So after the funeral, Julia was taken out back into that graveyard to the Laguerre family's marble mausoleum. She was laid out in a lily white dress, pink ribbons in her long, lustrous hair. People said how fresh and lovely she looked, even in death. And although she hadn't been on the island long, the mourners shed genuine tears as the heavy marble door to that mausoleum was swung closed and the key was turned in the iron lock. Late that night, Julia woke up, having been comatose, not dead. It was pitch black, the air clammy. She was laid out on a stone slab. She got up, felt her way around. She found the door, the keyhole. She felt the low ceiling where she found a tiny crack. She felt the stone walls, the stone floor. She felt some other things she didn't want to think about. As the reality of her situation set in, she began to panic. She was going to suffocate all over again. She was going to die alone in the dark with the rest of the... She kicked and shoved at that heavy marble door. She tried desperately to widen the tiny crack in the ceiling. She clawed at the stone walls, the stone floor. Her fingers found no purchase. People said that screams were heard in the vicinity over the next couple of days, but nobody paid them any mind, because everybody knew that graveyard was haunted. Well, a dozen years later, the drumbeats of war sounded across the country, and the war came to Edisto too. Laguerre's youngest son proudly marched off to join his regiment. But like many young men on both sides of that terrible war, he came home in a pine box. His funeral was held at the Edisto Presbyterian Church. And afterward, he was taken out back into that graveyard. It took 2 strong men to swing open that heavy marble door. And when they did, the clatter of bones brought them to their knees. Crumpled by the door were the remains of a young girl, pink ribbons in her brittle hair. The bones of her fingers shattered, frayed, from trying to dig through stone with her bare hands. Julia was laid out again, alongside the Laguerre's son, and once again that heavy marble door was swung closed, locked. But the next morning, when Mrs. Laguerre came to the graveyard to lay flowers, the door was ajar. She was worried about grave robbers, desecration. She called the cemetery's caretaker to come and see, but he couldn't explain it. So he saw to it that once again that door was closed and locked. But the next day, it was standing open. And the next, and the next, and the next. People say this persisted for years, until a better solution was found, a new kind of lock that required chains and multiple keys. But the day after that was installed, the door was standing wide open. That heavy iron triple lock smashed to pieces. The Laguerres hired a stonemason to seal the crypt permanently. But the morning after that work was done, the door was found torn off its hinges. It lay on the ground, broken into 3 pieces. Julia would not suffer it to be closed again. Now, y'all, when I first heard this story, I'll be honest with you, I thought it was just some old tale told to scare the tourists. But it's the kind of story that gets in your head. And it ate at me, the wondering, the need to know if it was true. So I drove out to the old Presbyterian church. I heard the buzz of the insects, saw those ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss. I went into the church, and I sat in the pew where generations of Laguerres had sat. And then I walked out back into that graveyard. I found the mausoleum marked J.B. Laguerre. Next to it, on the ground, lay a heavy marble door, broken into 3 pieces. And then you know what? Some of y'all are looking a little nervous. So I tell you what, we can stop the story right there if you want to. No? You can think what you like, maybe that door being open and it's not Julia's ghost. Maybe it's just a prank pulled by teenagers. Folks thinking that might help you sleep better tonight. But I think some of you are like me, and you'll have to know the rest. So what do you think?
Yeah.
So we'll go on?
Yeah.
Shall we go in?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
All right. I took one more step. I crossed the threshold of that mausoleum, and I was swallowed up by fear, desperation, resignation, despair. I looked down at the floor and I saw the claw marks. I stepped back out into the sunlight and I prayed for Julia to rest in peace.
Well, that's not tough to follow. Oh, what is this? I cannot see. Whose icy hands take hold of me? Oh, I am death, none can dispel. I open the door to heaven or hell. Oh death, how can it be that I must come and go with thee? Oh death, how can it be? I'm unprepared for eternity. Oh yes, I've come to take your soul, to leave your body and make it cold. I'll drop the flesh from off of your frame. The earth and worms all have their claim. I'll lock your jaw so you can't talk. I'll lock your knees so you can't walk. I'll close your eyes so you can't see. Come with me. There was a man who wanted to live forever. And he had good reason. He lived in a beautiful green valley that had a river that ran right down the center. His village was on the banks of that beautiful river, and it was filled with people and places that he loved. That desire built in him so much that he went to the edge of town and he found the oldest woman in the village. And he said, "Old woman, you are the oldest person I know. Do you have the secret to live forever?" And the old woman, she was sitting outside of her house and she was sunning herself, and she rocked for just a minute, and then she opened her eyes and looked at him and she said, "No, I don't. But there is a man. He lives far away in the green wood, and he is the oldest person that I know. Perhaps he has the secret that you seek." And so the young man thanked the old woman, and he walked down the road from her house, and he walked into that green forest for miles underneath the canopy of trees. And finally, he came to this clearing in the middle of the wood. It was filled with stumps, and there, on one of those stumps, was an old man with a beard down to his chest. He had an axe leaned up against the stump that he was sitting on, and he was picking his teeth with a splinter from one of the many trees that he'd felled in that clearing. And the young man, he walked up to the old man sitting on the stump, and he said, "Old man of the forest, you are the oldest person I know. Do you have the secret to live forever?" And the old man sat on the stump, still picking his teeth, thinking. And then he looked at the young man and he said, "I will live until I have chopped every tree in this forest down." And the young man thought for a second. He said, "No, that's not good enough, because one day you will cut the last tree in this forest, and I want to live forever." And the old man of the forest, he thought for another minute, and he said, "Well, I do know another man, the old man of the lake. He is far, far older than I. Perhaps he has the secret that you seek." And so the young man, he thanked the old man of the forest, and he continued down that road, through the clearing, through the trees, until he came to a rocky country and the edge of a lake that was so wide he couldn't even see the other side. And as he was walking along the shore of that lake, he began to hear a noise. It's almost a sucking sound. And he almost stumbled over the man. He was lying face down on the side of the lake with his face in the water. And he was slurping the water from the lake like he had a thirst that could never be quenched. And so the young man bent down and he tapped the old man on his shoulder. And the man lifted his face up out of the water, and it dripped down his hair and into his beard that went all the way to his waist. And the young man said, "Old man of the lake, you are the oldest person I know. I want the secret to live forever. Do you have it?" And the old man of the lake, he thought for a minute. He looked at the young man, and then he looked out across that vast expanse of water, and he said, "I will live until I have swallowed every ounce of water in this lake. And then I'll die." And the young man, he thought about it for a second, and he said, no, that's not good enough. One day, you will take your last sip of water, and I want to live forever. The old man of the lake, he thought about it for another minute, and he said, "Well, there is another man, the old man of the mountain. He is far, far older than I, and perhaps he has the secret that you seek." And so the young man thanked the old man of the lake, who put his face back down in the water and kept drinking. And he kept walking along the edge of the lake until the earth began to climb. And it climbed, and it climbed, and it climbed. And finally he got so high that when he looked down, he saw these tiny little white specks. And at first he thought they were sheep on the ground, until he realized that they were clouds. He was that high. And finally he came to the door of a great stone fortress that was bound in iron, and he knocked on the door. The door creaked open, and there stood an old man whose white beard went all the way down to the ground. And the young man said, "Old man of the mountain, you are the oldest person I know. I want the secret to live forever. Do you have it?" The old man of the mountain smiled, and he said, "I will live until this mountain crumbles to dust." And the young man thought about that long climb. He thought about those tiny white shapes that he thought were sheep but were clouds. And he said, "Yes, this is enough." And so the old man invited him into the fortress, and they lived there together for 100 years, happily discussing every topic imaginable. But eventually, the young man's thoughts turned back to that green valley where he started. He thought about the people and the places that he loved, the things that had made him want to live forever to begin with. And a yearning to see these things grew inside of him. And finally, he told the old man of the mountain that he wanted to return home for a visit. The old man's face fell, and he said, "You don't really want to do that. You're not going to find what you expect." But it didn't matter. It didn't matter what he said. The feeling had gotten so huge in the young man's chest that there was no fighting it.
And so finally, the old man gave him a horse, and he said, take this home, but, and this is most important, you cannot get off the horse. And the young man, he thought this was a simple thing to follow, right? So he got up on the horse, he rode down the mountain, he rode through the country where the lake had once been and it was now dry. He rode through the country where the forest had once stood and it was a plain. He came to the valley where he had grown up and it was still green and the river still ran through the center, but the village was gone. And in its place was this huge city, and it had hard plains and bright lights and terrible smells, and the people were moving so fast and talking so fast, and he recognized none of them. And he realized that the old man of the mountain had been right. He'd been right. He didn't find what he expected. He didn't find what he wanted. He didn't find many of the things that he loved. And so he decided to return to the mountain. And he turned his horse to go home. But as he was exiting the city, right on the outskirts, he saw an old man with a very old-fashioned wagon that had broken down on the side of the road. And the poor man was struggling to pull the wagon back up onto its axle. But it was clear that he didn't have the strength to do it. And the young man didn't even think about what he was doing. He just slid off the horse and he walked over to the wagon and he helped the old man lift it up and set it back onto the axle. And then he looked into the back of the wagon and he began to laugh. It was full of shoes, but not new shoes. Old shoes that were full of holes and scuffs. And he looked at the old man and he said, why do you have all of these worn out shoes? What are you doing? And the old man, who had a very kind face and twinkling dark eyes, said, oh, my friend, these are the shoes that I have worn out searching for you. I'm death. And I have found you at last. And in the end, the young man found death to be a friend. And they walked hand in hand together into the ever after.
I never, ever tell serious stories. Never. Amanda knows that. But a friend of mine interviewed, and I apologize, I don't remember how many, I think it was about 30 or 40 people they interviewed in a project up in the mountains here that felt that they had had encounters with the spirit world. And I listened to each of these tapes, and then I took pieces from each one of these stories, and I cobbled them together, and I wrote what you're going to hear now. So I'm kind of attached to this because, as Amanda said, you may choose to believe that there is truth in some of this, and you may not. I personally kind of do. It began in the springtime in a little cabin by the creek. I stood with my hands on my belly, just daydreaming of the baby we were about to bring into the world. My husband Jake and I, we so hoped for a little girl. We were going to name her Katie Beth. Well, the problem was we didn't have a little girl. Nope, we had two little girls, identical twins, Katie and Beth. The day that they were born, my husband Jake brought me a huge bouquet of fragrant, wild pink roses he had picked down by the creek. We were so happy. Well, our girls, they grew and grew. They were so much alike. I mean, both of them loved lima beans and hated collard greens. They both liked to stay up late and wake up early. They thought so much alike they could finish each other's sentences. Oh, but there were differences too. For instance, Beth's laugh was a cute little giggle. Katie's laugh, it was more like a loud cackle. Well, the spring that the girls turned 5, it rained and rained for days and days. And when the sun finally came out, Jake and I took the girls for a walk down by that creek. Oh, the water was turbulent that day, just rushing over the rocks. I warned the girls not to go near the edge. I don't know what happened. It felt like I just turned my back for a split second. And when I looked back around, Katie was reaching for a rose far out over the bank. And she slipped and fell into that water. Oh, I could barely hear her screams as she was carried downstream. It felt like Jake and I were just frozen in time, when we just felt like we stood there for an eternity, but probably not. And Jake ran and he jumped over the edge into the water and went after her. Sometime later, he came back, carrying her limp, lifeless body cradled in his arms. As he walked back towards the cabin, little Beth followed behind him, confused. I followed too. I staggered forward, my head reeling from shock and denial. When we got back to the house, I was too exhausted to cry, and I just sat down and rocked my little girl back and forth for hours, just combing through her wet hair with my fingers. Finally, Jake helped me up, and we bathed my little angel's frail body. And then I took from the drawer a crisp white dress. Oh, I remember the painstaking labor that went into making those dresses for my girls. I would sit up by the fireplace night after night, embroidering tiny pink flowers across the front. And now I was taking one of those crisp white dresses and putting it onto my little angel's limp, lifeless body. Well, poor little Beth, she didn't really understand death, but she knew her sister was not there and could not come out to play. We finally put our little Katie in a plain pine box, and we buried her in the cold ground. We solemnly walked home. Little Beth did not say a word. In fact, she did not speak for weeks. Time went by. Although life did not return to normal, we did eventually fall into a routine. Summer came. The roses bloomed profusely by the creek. They blossomed and they died. But no one ever picked them again. And then one day, I arose to the sound of Beth talking. I came out, and she was sitting by the fireplace, and she was laughing and giggling. At first, I thought she was playing with her dolls, but I turned to walk away, and I heard it. A loud cackle. I turned back, but it was just Beth and her dolls. Sometime later, Beth and I went into town, and dogs that were usually friendly to us barked and cowered as we walked by. I didn't know what to make of it. Fall came. One night, long after I had gone to bed, I was suddenly awakened by the feeling that someone was standing near me. I looked around thinking it was probably Beth, but no one was there. Although I felt this intense warmth surrounding me, it felt so wonderful. And then suddenly it was just gone, and I was left with this cold chill. I got up and I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and I ran into Beth's room to check on her. And when I did, I heard it. Two voices under the covers, laughing and whispering. Oh, my girls, they used to love to stay up late at night, long after they were supposed to be sleeping, sharing secrets under the blankets. I asked Beth, I said, who are you talking to? And she said, Katie, Mommy. Well, I didn't mention it to Jake in the morning because I was sure that I must have dreamed it. Then one day, little Beth was running around the house in one of those blanket capes. She told me she was playing Catch Me If You Can. I said, with who, sweetie? She said, with Beth, Mommy. With Katie, Mommy. Like, it was obvious, and I should have realized that. Well, as she went up the stairs, it did look as though somebody were stepping on the back of that cape and pulling it down, and she'd just pull it back over her shoulders and laugh about it. Then one day, Beth said to me, as I was helping her get dressed, I want to wear my white dress just like Katie today. Tears started to roll down my face. And I'm ashamed to tell you that I refused to let her wear that dress. In fact, that night, I took that little white dress with the pink flowers embroidered on it, and I threw it into the fire, and I watched it burn. Winter came, and snow blanketed the ground. The trees stood in the moonlight like skeletons with outstretched arms. One bitterly cold night, I was suddenly awoken by the sound of the door creaking open. I jumped out of bed. I ran to Beth's room to check on her, but her bed was empty. I raced to the door and I looked out, and I could see in the moonlight a small, shadowy figure moving through the snow. I hunched my shoulders against the cruel wind and I trudged after my little Beth. It almost appeared as something was drawing her forward. I called after her, but my voice was lost in the howling wind. And then I saw it. I saw her as clearly as if she had always been there. A little girl wearing a crisp white dress. My little Katie, wearing a white dress with pink flowers embroidered on the front. I watched as she put her hand out and took Beth's hand, the two of them laughing and giggling, and I just stared as they skipped off towards the steep embankment. I stared as they stepped over the edge into the frigid water. I wanted to run to my girls to try to save them, but a darkness held me back. I fell to the ground on my knees, pounding on the frozen earth. I wanted to cry, but nothing came. And then all of a sudden, I smelled it all around me, the fragrance of wild roses. And the tears started to roll down my cheeks. And then I felt a hand, a small, familiar hand, reach up and touch my face. And one tiny, delicate finger wiped away my tears. It began in the springtime in a cabin by the creek. It ended on a cold winter's night. Thank you.
I'm going to wrap us up with one more quick one. When I was 12 years old, my family bought our first house. Now, until that time, my mom and my dad and my brother and I had been transients, apartment dwellers, just moving in and out of places that belonged to other people never staying anywhere long enough to lay claim. But when we bought that house, it was going to be different. We were going to put paint on the walls, junk up the garage. We were going to stay. The house was a little rundown, and it was on the edge of, but not in the good neighborhood. And it had an odd history. It sold every couple of years, but we didn't care about any of that because it was all ours. Except that it wasn't. Somebody or something had already laid claim long before we ever moved in. The house had a central hallway, maybe 10, 12 feet long. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom branched off that hallway. Now, there was nothing overtly creepy in the appearance of the hallway. It had beige carpet, cream paint on the walls, a blindingly tacky gold light fixture. This was the early 1980s. There were no shadows. Every corner, every crevice was in plain view. But something lingered in that hallway. Something cold, watchful, predatory. And every time I left my bedroom, I felt it surge. I quickly figured out that if I could run down the hall, through the den, and into the kitchen in less than 3 seconds, I would be okay. Now, it seems kind of foolish at this point that I thought I could somehow outrun malevolent energy. But we all tell ourselves the stories that we need to feel safe, don't we? We create these rituals to protect us, and then we convince ourselves that they have power. Right? Throw salt over your shoulder, leave on the closet light, pull the covers up tight, and don't let your hand hang down off the bed. So my first ritual was running. If I could run far enough, fast enough, I would be safe. And my second ritual was hiding in a crowd. So every night, I would make it a point to get ready for bed before the rest of my family, so that I could cross the hallway from my bedroom to the bathroom and back while everybody else was still up bustling around. You know, I think there was something about my father that kept whatever it was in that hallway temporarily at bay. It must have been his quiet strength. He's one of these people who just unrufflable. Or maybe it was my mother and my brother filling the hallway with their endless chatter, drowning out the darker energy. But whatever the case, with them as cover, I could safely navigate the hallway. And then I'd get back into my bedroom and employ my third ritual. I would lock the door 3 times, trusting that that would keep me safe through the night. But sometimes, I would be up late after everybody else, studying or some such. And if I had to get to the bathroom, I would have to steel myself to run across the hall. The last night I lived in the house was one of those nights. Things at home had been kind of chaotic all week. I was getting ready to move away from home, go off to college, and my brother was packing up to go back for fall semester. And it had seemed as if the thing in the hallway was even more on edge than usual, almost as if the impending family upheaval was disrupting its plans. So that night, I worked my final shift at the restaurant in town where I was waitressing to make money for school. And I got home a little after midnight, long after everybody else had gone to bed. Now, I knew from years of experience that I could run through the kitchen and through the den, down the hall, get into my room in less than 3 seconds and be safe. But I was going to have to do it in the dark. I stood in the kitchen, gathering my courage. 5, 4, 3, 2, 2, 1.5, 1.25. Oh, just go! I took off through the house, and I almost made it. I tripped over the laundry basket. My brother was always leaving in the hallway to irk our mother. I felt the coldness first, up the back of my neck, and then that familiar surge, silent, seething hunger. I wrenched open my bedroom door, dashed inside, slammed it shut. Stood there, trying to catch my breath. I looked around my childhood bedroom. Pink paint I'd put on the walls myself when I was 12 years old. Shelves full of my favorite books. All the things that I had done to lay claim to that space, make it my own. In the morning, I was going to be moving into temporary housing again, college dorm. I dithered for far too long about what to take with me. This poster, that pair of shoes. And as I packed and repacked and packed and repacked, I drank too much water. I had to get to the bathroom. I tiptoed across my bedroom, pressed my ear to the door, and listened. All was quiet. You know that sound it makes when you just barely brush past something, or something barely brushes past you? You know that sound? Something shifted on the other side of the door. Something was listening back. It took me almost 30 minutes to get up the courage to open that door and run across the hall. 30 minutes more to build up the nerve to run back. Followed by 30 years of trying to forget the sound of my locked bedroom door rattling as I hid behind the bed. Now, I never knew if it was someone who had died in the house or if it was just the egregor of the people who'd lived there before, a built-up violence in search of release. But whatever it was, it taught me to fear bright spaces. Places where you ought to be safe, where you think you're alone, but get the feeling that you're not. Now be safe going home. Let's get Melanie and Jess back up there. Thank you, everybody.
I know.